Now it is my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker for today. Dr. Peter Gerhardt joins us this morning after a very long travel day yesterday, consisting of canceled flights and long, tiring airport layovers, a number of flight changes. He mentioned to me it was over 4,000 miles, I think you said, to get here, and he arrived very late, so we're very pleased that he's awake this morning and arrived safely in Utah. Dr. Peter Gerhardt is the Director of Education, Upper School for the McCartan School in New York City. He has over 30 years of experience utilizing the principles of applied behavioral analysis in support of adolescents and adults with ASD in educational, employment, residential, and community-based settings. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gerhardt here to our conference.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. I'm from New York. I'm supposed to be rude. You guys aren't. It's actually a requirement for citizenship in New York that you have to be rude. First, I want to thank you all for coming out. It's always exciting for me to be able to talk about adolescents and adults to large groups, because we are increasingly having a large group of adolescents and adults with autism in need of services. So my hope is to sort of inspire some of you to think that maybe this is a career choice, those of you who are not parents here, because it really is, I think, I have kind of the coolest job in the world. My job description at the end of the day is change somebody's life for the better. That's it. It's not about how many hours I work. It's not about what I do during those hours. It's what's the impact of what I do. And I think if I do that right, that's kind of a nice way to live. And then I get to sort of travel out to Utah and talk about it. And, you know, when I get dressed up, today I'm dressed up because I have on black jeans, you know, like it's really not a bad way to sort of make your living, and I get to meet a whole bunch of really cool people and a whole bunch of really cool people with autism. So, you know, I really am very happy to be here. And I do want to thank also Tony Harris for putting up with my executive functioning deficits in all the arrangements to get here. I'm not the most organized person, so I thank her for her patience. This slide really just represents, for me, kind of the complexity that is autism in adolescents and adults. I am a behavior analyst, so I work in the world of applied behavior analysis, but I consistently read outside my field because I'm interested in what else is going on in the world, and how does that apply to what I'm trying to do to help support this individual with ASD have a life of competence, dignity, and quality. A couple of quick points before we actually get into some of the nitty-gritty thing. I do like to point out that independent of how evidence-based your interventions are, teaching the wrong skills right is no better than teaching the right skills poorly. So I go into classrooms and I see 17-year-olds still working on coin identification. And I ask, do you think at some point he's just gonna wake up and go, oh, now I get it? And that this is gonna change his life somehow. This is a seminal event in his life where we have found that if we teach kids how to purchase first and then teach them money, teaching money is an easier thing to do because now money makes sense. And I will also tell you that you can go through your entire life without knowing what the value of a single coin is. I do a lot of work over in Europe. And over in Europe, I can understand the bills, because euros sort of look like dollars, and they have numbers that I understand, right? The coins, they're too small. I can't figure out they have dollar coins and $5 coins, and so I just put them all in my pocket, and before I fly back home, whoever I see last who gives me a cup of coffee gets a really, really, really big tip. And I get by without ever knowing what a coin is. So oftentimes we focus on the wrong things. When we're talking about transitioning, just so you know, time is not on our side. Now, these numbers are actually out of a New York school year, New York State, but If we have 211 school days, 4.5 hours of engaged time, that's a 6-hour school day, so take out lunch, breaks, reinforcement intervals, that sort of stuff. 4.5 hours, that's 950 hours a year. Over 5 transition years, 4,800. 30 goals in the IUP, 150 goals across 5 years. That only gives us 31 hours to teach each goal. But that's in a perfect world, right? Any of you live and work in a perfect world? Yeah, I don't. So then add into it like student absences and not being fully engaged and staff turnovers and no field trips and all of this sort of stuff. And that number shrinks down so that really we only have 20 hours to work on each goal. And now all of a sudden you see the urgency of making sure that we teach the right stuff in the right conditions. Because I know a whole lot of adults who can tell you all 50 states, but they can't use a public bathroom. I can tell you a whole bunch of adults who have college degrees, but don't know how to drive a car or go on a job interview. There's a lot of stuff to life that you can't learn in a classroom. As a matter of fact, most of life you don't learn in a classroom, right? So when we talk about this idea of transitioning to adulthood, we by definition need to expand our definition forward. My third point is I think we really should be successful in our classrooms. Why? Because we control every single variable in our classroom. We say how many kids there are, who works with these kids, how long they work with them, what they do during the day, what the reinforcement schedule is, are the lights on, are the lights off, is there music playing in the background? Like, we control everything. We should be successful. I think the real measure of success is what does this kid do when we're gone? That's what I want to know. When he goes home, what does he do? And I don't think we can fall back anymore on that, well, it didn't generalize home. Well, you know what? Then we did something wrong, quite honestly. Now, there are a lot of issues related to generalization. I'll talk a little bit about that, but I think we need to make sure that what we're doing in our classroom ties directly to what the world outside is going to need from this individual. Otherwise, we're wasting time. And I think that's the biggest sin we commit in our field, is that we waste time. We waste kids' time, we waste parents' time, we waste teachers' time, you waste my time. And I just no longer will waste any time. Fourth issue, adulthood's tough, right? You guys are probably tired at the end of the day, aren't you? You do an awful lot just to get to the end of the day. On good days, you're tired, and then figure in bad days. Now imagine every single day you're trying to figure out what all these other people in your environment are telling you to do and what they want from you and what they expect from you and how you're supposed to do that. I would think that'd be pretty exhausting, right? That's kind of a difficult life. So I have to respect the effort that all of my students and all my adults make, sometimes to do what I think is even the simplest task. But anyway, if we all agree on those, let me just tell you how I got to where I am today to do this talk. Here we have sort of the quintessential male dilemma, right? I just peed, do I put the toilet seat down or do I leave it up? An essential adult skill, right? Now, I have 2 older sisters, so I mastered this skill sometime around the age of 4, right? I will also point out that this is a skill that was shaped in my repertoire and maintained in my repertoire solely through punishment procedures. No woman ever thanked me for putting the toilet seat down. But if I left it up, there was a pretty significant consequence, right? Well, why this is relevant is, my wife and I, 6 years ago, we separated. We're now divorced. We're still really good friends. I feel like I always have to say that. But after 2 years of living alone, I realized I stopped putting the toilet seat down at home. And I started to think, well, I'm a pretty socially fluent guy. Like, I know why I do this. So how do I expect anything that I taught my students to generalize and maintain over time once you remove the contingencies? If it happens to me, why do I expect it not to happen to anybody else? So I started to think, how do I fix this? The second part is you work enough with adults, and I've worked with probably close to 300 plus adults over my lifetime. You get to ask the question, how come nobody ever taught you this? I'm really tired of meeting adults who can identify the poison sign but will still drink the poison. Who can identify the word exit because we did it as one of their sight words but don't know that's how you leave the building. I'm really tired of adults who actually can tell you all 50 states but don't know how to use a public men's room. You know, I'm like, how come nobody taught you this? Why did we think all this stuff wasn't important? You know, because I look back, I meet adults, I think if you graduate out of our public education system in the United States, you should graduate with at least two things, a functional communication system and know how to use a public bathroom. Like, if you don't have those two things, I think everything else is kind of not all that important. If you can't communicate and you can't go to the bathroom when you want to, and if you want to talk about a really good safety skill, teaching kids to independently use public bathrooms is a really, really good safety skill. Even though sometimes, usually moms think public men's rooms are this hotbed of like wild sexual antics involving trapezes. You know, trapezes, that's a trampoline and a trapeze. That's after 5 hours of sleep. So, but then I did part 4, which is a quasi-experiment, part 3, which at the McCartan School, 2 classes, each with 5 kids, classic autism, low verbal kids, one-on-one instruction, ABA-based school. My second week there, I said, listen, I'm gonna come into your classroom, put down a timer. When the timer goes off, I want you to walk away from all your students, and then we're gonna take data on what your students do. So timer goes off, all the teachers walk away, we watch the students. What do you think the students did? Nothing. They did absolutely nothing. Now, somebody once said, well, typical kids would do, I said, no, typical kids would do everything but what they were supposed to do. Right? They would take out their cell phone, they'd start talking, they'd be doing everything else. My kids just sat there. And that taught me a couple things. It taught me everything that we're doing was 100% teacher-directed. The teacher initiated instruction, ended instruction, managed instruction. It was all by the teacher. Second thing it taught me was that I think student engagement was really maintained by negative reinforcement, not positive reinforcement. My students were reinforced by the end of the task. Because I think if they were reinforced by positive reinforcement, they would have kept working a bit because they hadn't gotten to their goal. Once they got to the goal of the teacher not being there, they just stopped. And I don't think that's really what we want to do. And the third thing was that nothing we were teaching was of any interest or value to my students. Because it's of interest or value, you keep doing it, right? So that presented me with a challenge. Frank, do you have a favor to hand me a soda, my soda, or whatever those, one of those, I don't care which one. Thank you. This presentation is brought to you by Diet Coke. No, that's not true. I have no obligation to any, especially since this is a Pepsi campus, I found that out. Well, at the same time, I was reading a book called Reality is Broken by Jane McGonigal. And it's about this industry of this massive multiplayer online games like World of Warcraft and all that sort of stuff. And in it, she points out that Americans on average spend 142 hours a year playing these games. 142 hours a year. I play 0. So somebody here plays 284 hours just to make up for me. Okay? Worldwide, 3.2 billion hours are spent doing this stuff. And for what? For what? You level up as a knight errant warrior? Like that's your reinforcer? Like what is the? And I started to think, well, why? And I started to look at game theory, and well, basically a game is defined as something that has a goal. Well, in education and behavior analysis, we have a goal, right? We're good with goals. It's something that has rules. We're really good with rules. It's something that has a feedback system. We have a really good feedback system. But the difference between a game and what we do is that a game requires voluntary participation, and we don't have that. By definition, we have coerced participation. Now, I don't mean coerced in a bad way. Like the American public education system is a coercive system. Like you are required to go to school. That's not a bad word there. But we don't have that component. And then I don't have a whole lot of time, but then I started to think, well, these are the 7 dimensions of applied behavior analysis. Anyway, well, we have applied, so that's a goal. We have behavioral, those are rules. We have analytic, that's a system of feedback. We go all the way through, and then we get to the bottom where we have generality, designed from the outset to operate in new environments and continue after formal treatments have ended. We forget this 7th step. We forget this 7 criteria. And maybe this is where this voluntary participation actually comes into play. Now, this is important for a number of reasons. Think in your own life. You're often taught things that you're not all that interested in. And within 30 seconds after being taught that thing, what happens to that thing? It drops out of your repertoire, right? Well, if 90% of the time I am teaching you stuff that you have no interest in, that you find no value in, it's going to quickly drop out. Most high school kids take high school algebra, and they learn to do something called factoring a binomial equation, right? FOIL, first, outer, inner, last, right? After you learn to factor a binomial equation, the next time most Americans factor a binomial equation is when their child takes high school algebra, and they have to do it again. Because most of you, unless you go into science or engineering, you aren't doing that, so it falls out of your repertoire. But you learned it, you acquired it. We thought, now, high school algebra is important. I'm not knocking that at all. But I'm just saying that there's more that we have to look at, because you know what? The adult system is in a bit of a crisis. You know, the education system, as challenging as it may be, at least it has this thing called an entitlement and funding and a mandate, and you know, all of the IEP is actually a legal binding document. It's a contract. In the adult service world, we have kind of gentleman agreements. We have these things that say, yeah, this is what I plan to do. But if I don't do it, there's really no recourse. Parents can't go to court. Clients can't go to court. We have a system that's overworked and underpaid. Do you know in every state in the union, including Utah, it is harder to get a job as a licensed manicurist than it is to get a job working with adults with autism? There are higher standards to become a manicurist. Just the term licensed, right? You have to take a test, you have to study, you have to have coursework, you have to have supervised. You know what the criteria is to work with adults with autism? High school diploma or GED, driver's license, and a criminal background check. Just when your life is supposed to get more interesting, more challenging, more fun, more diverse, more complex, more far-reaching, we decide that we don't need people who are really well-trained to work with you. Now, I've worked with some brilliant people who only have high school diplomas and are great therapists. It's not about that. It's about the desire to really do this as a career. That's where the difference comes in, okay? Add to that the fact that Paul Shattuck, in a 2012 article, looked at all the research on adults with autism from 2000 to 2012 and basically came to the conclusion that the world of adult services is basically underknowledged. Like, we don't know a whole lot about adults. You know, there's not a whole lot of interest. Do you know why I have a career? Do you know why I'm here today? Because nobody else ever wanted my job. That's why I'm here today. You know, I was lucky enough back in 1980 to start working with adolescents, and it's all I've ever done, while everybody else gets into the field to work with little kids. And that's great. Little kids are fun, little kids are cute. If little kids hit you, it's not that big a deal. But you know what? Little kids bore me to tears. You know, adolescents and adults, like, they fascinate me. Like, what is it that you can actually do with your life? But we also know the least about this group of individuals. And that presents us with a real challenge. And unfortunately, when we look at our outcome data, it's not all that impressive. Rue et al., again out of Paul Shattuck's lab, looking at the National Longitudinal Transition Survey Part 2 data, realized that only about 50% of 7 years out of high school, only 53% of kids with autism had ever had paid employment, ever. Not had worked for 6 months, had ever had paid employment. And when they worked, they made less than their peers with other disability labels, and they worked at a narrower range of jobs. The 3 identifiers that were most common for people who had worked, if they had language, that kind of makes sense, that helps. Good adaptive behavior skills, that makes sense. I do a lot of work in adaptive behavior. But you know the third factor? If their parents had money. If their parents were wealthy, they could help this kid get a job and they could support this kid. And you know what really bothers me about that? That has nothing to do with us. They didn't even need us to do that. They would have done that anyway. So a third of the factors associated with whether or not he gets employment afterwards has nothing to do with us. So we don't even get to take credit for that. We need to look much more critically at what we're doing that leads to competence and independence in adulthood, okay? Well, but what does that mean? What does competence and independence mean in adulthood? Well, this is quality of life. And what is quality of life? I live in New York City, right? I live in Manhattan. You know, I woke up this morning and I looked out my window and I saw mountains and then I went, all right, I'm going online. I mean, it's beautiful, but like, I don't get it. Like, I don't climb mountains. I don't like, it looks cold. It looks like, give me asphalt and a push cart and I'm okay. But there are people here who think that that's like Dante's 7th circle of hell. So, because quality of life is this really idiosyncratic thing. Well, here's the most commonly accepted definition. Quality of life is a term used to describe a temporal condition, so it's time-bound, of personal satisfaction, so how the person sees it himself, with such core life conditions as physical well-being, are you healthy? Emotional well-being, so your mental health, interpersonal relations, do you have friends? Social inclusion, are you part of a bigger social world? Personal growth, are you challenged on a regular basis? Material well-being, do you have the financial resources to do what you want to do? Self-determination, do you get to pursue your own course? And individual rights. How's that going in your own life? It's a pretty high standard, right? So now how do we do this for adolescents and adults with ASD, who get very little choice in their life, who get very little opportunity to do what they want to do, who we tell them what to do all the time, right? A friend of mine says that, you know what the problem with the adult developmental disability system is in the United States of America? He says, the problem is we don't let adults with autism dance drunk on a table at Cabo San Lucas at 3 o'clock in the morning. And why that's a problem is that's probably the best story that all their caregivers have. So we have this sort of division because we say, oh no, this isn't in your best interest. Well, I gotta tell you, some of the best times of my life were not in my best interests. And I bet that for most of you too, that's the same thing. Now, what little research we have in quality of life in ASD, there's more research in intellectual disabilities, but that's a different thing. At least that shows us that services make a difference. That if you get good services, it can help improve your quality of life. Now that sort of makes sense, but it's nice to have research because a lot of times what we think makes sense isn't actually borne out in research. But as we move forward, I think it's important for all of us to start thinking about, well, what am I teaching today and how is that going to impact him 5 years from now? Like, what is the impact of what I'm doing today on his life 5 years from now? And if the answer is none, maybe we should start thinking about why we're teaching that and move in a different direction. Which leads me to educationally, I think we need to change our mission. I travel a lot, and I go to schools, and almost every school for kids with autism and every public school, their mission is to allow individuals with ASD to reach their highest potential, right? That's what we say. Our mission is to allow individuals with ASD to reach their highest potential. First of all, I don't know about you guys, but I hope that when I graduated high school, that wasn't my highest potential. Like, I hope my highest potential is still well ahead of me. I hope it didn't happen back when I was 18. Bruce Springsteen wrote a whole song about hitting your highest potential in high school called Glory Days, right? So there's a whole other area there. So I think we need to quantify this. I think that we need to start saying that when kids graduate this program, they graduate not employable, but employed a minimum of 20 hours. Why? Because we have the resources in the educational system to get him a job. The adult system really doesn't, but the adult system can support him in a job if he has a job. We need to actually give him the social skills, not just to do stuff in the classroom, but to do stuff out in the community and the world in which we live. We need to make him part of the community at large. And you can see all the rest of these. What they really come down to is how do we build a life for this individual where he or she lives. I did a similar talk like this at a mega church down in Florida. And afterwards, the pastor came up to me and said, "You and I are in the same field, you know?" And I said, "My mother would be happy to hear that, but I don't really think so." "Why do you say that?" And he said, "Because we're both about developing community." And that's what it is. That's what your job is to develop community. And coming out here today, I found that you guys really are good at developing community. That there is this sense that we're all in this together here. Well, now we have to make sure that that rising tide lifts all boats, and that those boats have people with ASD in them, so that as we all move forward, that everybody else benefits from that. I'm going to skip ahead to this little bit because I want to point out that, you know what, we are a pretty young field. And I'm asking an awful lot of you given how young a field we are. It's only 1943, right? Leo Kanner's first article, right? Disturbances of affective contact in a journal called Nervous Child. I love the fact that in 1943 we had a journal called Nervous Child. I guess because Antsy Little Bugger was taken already, so we had to come up with something else. But then we had, shortly thereafter, Hans Asperger published his first article, but because Hans Asperger was an Austrian psychiatrist, and we had this thing called World War II going on, most people didn't read the research coming out of Nazi Germany, so it sort of lay fallow until Uta Frith discovered it. Then we had this crazy guy, right? We had Bruno Bettelheim come along and say, you mothers caused this. And you know what the whole country said? Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I will tell you right now, I need no other justification for me to be a science-based person in ASD than this. Because do you know how many parents were told that they caused this by being bad parents? And even though they learned later that they didn't, part of them still in the back of their head, they think, maybe it was something I did. Because some guy in a white coat said, you're such a bad mother, you caused this. At Bettelheim School, he had a school in Chicago called the Orthogenic Institute. He had a statue of a mother outside that he encouraged his students to urinate on, defecate on, throw books at, spit on, to work out their resentment against mothers. And then he claimed a lot of success. Probably a lot of success for the statue building industry, but not really for kids with autism. That would be about it. But even then, some people thought different. Okay, we had Bernie Rimland and his book about a neural theory of autism, and then applied behavior analysis started to get involved. And then we had the 1987 Lovas article where early intervention, that a certain percentage of kids actually could go on to be indistinguishable from their peers. He never said recovery, right? He said indistinguishable from their peers. That's an important distinction here. But today, what does that mean for us? Well, this is the three-term contingency. And by the way, if you haven't realized it by now, I violate copyright law about 500 times over the course of this presentation. So if any of you are copyright lawyers, go ahead and sue me. You will get a laptop and a bunch of comic books. That's about it. It's the three-term contingency, right? Antecedent, behavior, consequence. You guys know this. So the antecedent, somebody starts yelling in the environment. Behavior, our student starts crying. The consequence is either positive reinforcement. We go up to the student and say, oh, it's okay, calm down, don't worry about it, honey. Or the crying actually causes the yelling to stop, so it's negatively reinforced. Let me ask you this, are you guys that simple? No, you're not, right? Now, this is true, this is science. But the fact is, you have about 5,000 of these running at any given time. And they compete with one another all the time. That's how we make decisions, by which one actually takes priority at any given time. What makes us think that this adolescent with autism doesn't have 5,000 contingencies running at any given time? And then we wonder why he doesn't do the things that we want him to do, or why he does the things that he does. Right? I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but in the 80s, at the height of the AIDS crisis, there's still an AIDS crisis, just people live longer, but one of the catchphrases was, if you sleep with someone, you sleep with everyone they ever slept with. If you work with adolescents and adults with autism, you work with everyone they ever worked with. Good, better, and different. If the people they worked with were really bad, I still have to deal with that. If they were great, I have to deal with that. So there's this whole history that comes to it. So what we have is a situation where I now say, go to work. And then we have all of these intervening variables and all of these learning experiences. Age, sexuality, mental health issues, boredom. I think boredom is a big, big issue with adolescents. I go into classrooms and I tell the teacher, I said, just so you know, if I was him, I would have hit you too. Like, I would have, because that's the only way I could get you to stop doing this. like, I get this, I really do. So, and then we have aggression, and then we have the very confused professional, because we don't understand the complexity of individuals. And I think folks on the spectrum are more complex than you guys are. You guys, I can probably understand 90% of what you do. 10%, forget it. Like, you guys, whatever you do, that's your own gig. But 90%, because we have a similar understanding of how life works. My guys, absolutely not. So I have to think from their point of view how this stuff works and what they really want out of life. So the challenge that lies ahead for behavior analysis and for education is not to look for simple solutions to complex problems, while at the same time not forgetting that simple solutions sometimes work best. I go into schools and they say, every time we do math, he hits me. You know what I say? Stop doing math. I'm like, that's about it. He's still doing like addition and subtraction and he's 16, forget it. Like, he's done. Let's move on. US Department of Labor statistics, by the way, most Americans on a daily basis, 5th grade reading, 3rd grade math. Most Americans are reading People magazine and adding up very simple equations. That's all it takes to be independent in America, 5th grade reading, 3rd grade math. And that's the norm. So you can see that we really have sort of this diversity. I'm going to skip through this because, again, I want to talk a little bit about prompting and prompting with adults and behavior analysis. Like, we're very big on prompting, and we don't like verbal prompts, right? Like, we hate verbal prompts. Like, we want to fade verbal prompts. Verbal prompts are like, I will point out that, just so you know, the world outside your classrooms functions on verbal prompts. And if you don't believe me, next time at the supermarket and that person stops in front of you with their cart and they're blocking the aisle, gesturally prompt them to move and see how they respond. Right? Gesturally prompt them and see what happens. The world outside functions on verbal prompts, so I want my guys to respond to verbal prompts. The problem with verbal prompts is I think that verbal prompts are the most susceptible to abuse. And parents do this. Not parents with autism, all parents do this. It's that, Johnny, John Stratford Avon, get over it. Like, that's what we do, right? Because it's easy to do that. You don't have to move to do that. When if we just say John, and then if he doesn't respond, then we can just reprompt. That's the way we're supposed to do it, but we've sort of gotten away. But just so you know, prompts are everywhere, and I've started to take these photographs that I'm sure at some point will get me arrested because I'm taking photographs in public bathrooms. Because apparently in public bathrooms, and apparently it's only we men who require a series of prompts. So we have clean this restroom after each use. It's up to you. Gentlemen, please put the toilet seat down after each use. And then this is my favorite. Please flush after each use. I would have thought that would have been mastered a long time ago. But apparently not. So prompts really are everywhere. Okay? If you haven't read this article, I really strongly suggest you do. It's by Diane Bannerman. It's Balancing the Right to Personal Liberties with Active Habilitation, the Right of People with Developmental Disabilities to Eat Too Many Donuts and Take a Nap. You know, I got in last night after a very, very long travel day, and I really try and stick to a pretty strict diet. but I was tired and I really felt I just wanted to eat something. And I had had food on the plane, so I had a Hot Pocket. Do you know how bad that is? That's like, why don't I just like cut up raw bacon fat? But you know, it was really good. But nobody was standing around me putting a minus on my data sheet saying, oh no, he violated his rules of dieting. Like, we all get to make sort of choices in our lives, right? Just 2 quick slides on positive reinforcement, because I think positive reinforcement is our most powerful, least well understood, most poorly utilized intervention, and I think it's because biologically we're not good positive reinforcers. I think it's part of our fight or flight mechanism. We're programmed to recognize the aberrant and ignore the normative. That's what it is. We have a society that's not based on positive. No cop ever pulls you over and says, I'd like to thank you for going 65, here's $100. Like, it's not part of our repertoire. But I hear this all the time, and I'm sure you have said it. She knows she's not supposed to do that. I know you've said it. We all say it. Well, I would just like to point out that I know I am not supposed to speed. I know that. There's a written prompt every 3 miles to tell me not to speed. My GPS turns red when I speed. Where I live, the speed limit is 65 on highways, so that means I go 85. I think 20 miles above is a reasonable interpretation of it. And I'm not alone. Like, I'm not zipping in. I'm not like Fast and Furious Gerhardt. Like, I'm like just kind of zipping along with everybody else. And if I look back, and I actually did the data, about every 3 years I do get a speeding ticket. I get a speeding ticket. And if I get a speeding ticket and I'm going 20 miles over the speed limit, that's a big speeding ticket. My last speeding ticket was $680. Yeah, but you know what that meant to me? That for the 3 years before that, I paid $2 a day to speed, and I'm okay with that. I would rather pay the state of New York in advance every 3 years. Here. Now just leave me alone. Because I have multiple contingencies running in my head at any given time, and then it changes. So it's not about what you know you're supposed to do, but what's the right contingency at any given moment. So, given its complexity, what do we need to do? Well, I've started to look at curb cuts, and now we all know curb cuts as they pertain to people with physical disabilities. We know ramps and handicapped parking places and handicapped bathroom stalls and all of this other sort of stuff. The hotel where I'm at, like, and every hotel in America has where the number for the room is, there's also Braille, like with the number, which is great, but I honestly don't know, like, how if you need Braille in the community, how you find Braille in the community. I'm not trying to, but it seems like it's a weird thing. But just so you also know, Braille is a dying art. Fewer and fewer people who are blind actually learn how to read Braille because we have such great technology now. We have so many e-readers that it's just not necessary to learn Braille. But, so what's a curb cut for someone with ASD? I think an important curb cut is something called resilience. Now, resilience is kind of a hip thing right now. It all goes in with like mindfulness and like all this sort of stuff, so it's very hip, but it's a very behavioral phenomena. It's really just resistance to extinction, okay? It's being able to stick to something over time. Most kids with autism that I work with across the spectrum, and adults, they try something that didn't work, and what do? They give up. And by and large, we've sort of taught them that. We've taught them to, if you hit in trouble, ask for help, and that's great. But then we should also teach them to ask for help, and then sometimes they're going to say, fix it yourself. Because that's how life works. We're so geared to not let kids make mistakes that kids never learn. A good friend of mine, Karen Zucker, was supposed to meet me at a program in Pennsylvania 2 years ago, and it should have been a 2-hour drive from where she lived in New Jersey to this program in Pennsylvania. She got so lost it took her 5 hours. It was like her driving experience was my flight experience yesterday. 5 hours. She called in a couple times. She didn't have a GPS. She called in a couple times to the school. She was so lost they couldn't even tell her where she was, like, and how to get there. But she finally got there. And we're like, oh, thank God you got here. Like, we're getting worried about you. Like, how'd you get so lost? And then we started to think, if she was an adult with an Asperger's syndrome label, and she got lost, after the first hour, we'd probably call the cops. And then when they finally got there, someone would say, you know what, I don't think you can drive long distances anymore. Like, we have to make sure as opposed to praising them for figuring it out, we would punish them for making the mistake in the first place. And I don't know about you guys, but the most important skill I have in my repertoire is not making mistakes, it's how to fix my mistakes. And if we're not teaching kids how to fix mistakes, that's a major skill deficit, okay? I think the second curb cut is decent choice-making skills. Everything you do as an adult requires choice-making. You go to the grocery store, there are 16 types of toilet paper. You wake up in the morning, you decide what to wear. Everything you do. Yet most adults with autism have very poor choice-making skills, and kids with classic autism, low verbal skills, they have like either or, right? And even that, many of them don't have really well, because they say, oh, he always takes the last choice. Right? It's like, so you're offering apple or banana, he always takes banana. Like, for some reason, we've accepted that that's autism, as opposed to the fact that we taught that to him. And we taught him that because we put emphasis on the last thing. We go, John, do you want the apple or the banana? Right? And then he responded to that, and he learned it. Well, you know what? This is really how you guys make choices. I say, do you want an apple? The first thing you do is you look at that apple. And do you want that apple? And then you say, well, I'd like an apple, but I want a Granny Smith apple. No, I want a Golden Delicious. No, I want a Macintosh apple. No, I want a Gala. No, okay, I'll take the Golden Delicious apple. And then, well, I'm going to go cut it up and have cheese with it. No, I'm just going to go cut. No, I'm going to have no, I really want applesauce. But you guys do that like that. The kid with autism says, yes, I want the apple. He takes the apple. Then he goes to walk away, and 9 times out of 10, you know what you do? You say, sit down and eat your apple. As opposed to saying what subsequent choices he's actually going to make. Because that's the fun part of life. The third curb cut, train the neurotypicals. Right? This is a friend of mine, Donna. Donna's on the spectrum. Donna was part of a support group that I used to run. Donna has an Asperger's syndrome diagnosis, but she's also very, very quirky anyway, just in her own right. She was going to see a new gynecologist, and we recommended that she disclose to her gynecologist that she has Asperger's syndrome, so she went. She told the gynecologist, you should know I have Asperger's syndrome, and the gynecologist said, no, you don't. She said, yes, I do. He said, no, you don't. She said, yes, I do. He said, no, you don't. And she said, yes, I do, you stupid MF SOB. Cursed him out like a sailor. Obviously didn't have her gynecological appointment that day. Came back to group. We did some role play about how she could have handled it a little better. And in the third role play, she turned to me and said, you know what? If you neurotypicals have all the skills, why don't you adapt for a while, damn it? Why is it always my fault? She said, if I was a wheelchair user, you wouldn't keep saying I'd hire you, but you got to learn to walk first. Why do you do this to me? And I said, that's a really good point. So together we called the doctor and said, how come you thought she didn't have? And he said, quote unquote, if she did, she wouldn't be self-aware enough to tell me she had Asperger's syndrome. Now, this is an educated person. I will point out that in the community at large, the level of ignorance, and I don't mean that in a negative way, just the lack of about what ASD really is staggering. It is staggering. So we told Donna, I don't care what he knows about your vagina, please go to another doctor because he knows nothing about you. That was our resolution there. Knowledge can be powerful because we know how to change perceptions, but you know what? In ASD, we have done more autism awareness in 2015 than we've ever done in the history of mankind, right? This is Autism Awareness Month. April 2nd was like light it up blue, right? Autism Speaks, light it up blue. Like everything, like the Empire State Building in New York was blue. Like great. But you know what 90% of the people know about autism? It's a horrible, significant, challenging developmental disability. We need to research it, we need to cure it. It's an epidemic. There's never been an epidemic in the history of mankind. And then you guys come along and say, yeah, but he can be your friend. And he can live next to you. And she can date your son. Those are two different messages, right? I will tell you, I am so tired of talking about the deficits of autism, I don't care. All I want to talk about from now on are the strengths. I want to talk about what people can do. Because, you know, for all of you here today, there's more that you can't do than that you can do. But nobody focuses on that, do they? I can't speak Greek. Nobody says, oh, we got to do a Greek-speaking program for him. Right? They say, I'd like you to meet Peter, but just so you know, he doesn't speak Greek, so don't speak Greek. People focus on what I can do. But in ASD, we don't talk about that, do we? I think it's critically important as we go forward, I tell the community at large, you want to know real human emotion? Hang out with somebody with autism for a while, because if somebody with autism is happy, there's nobody in the world who's happier. Somebody is upset, there's nobody in the world that's more upset, because there's no social filter, right? Yeah, I say, if somebody with autism likes you, just so you know, they just like you. Like, they're not after your hot sister. They don't like what in your car. They just like you. That's all there is to it, right? There's a purity to that I really appreciate. Number 4, let's teach all skills in the correct order. What you do every day matters more than what you do once in a while. When I start transition planning, one of the first questions I ask parents is I say, do you get up by an alarm clock in the morning? And they say, yeah, of course I do. I say, good, does your son or daughter get up by an alarm clock? And they say, no, I get them up. I'm like, well, why don't we teach them to get up by an alarm clock? They're like, I hadn't thought about that. Now, here's a thing that every single one of you does every day that for some reason nobody thought was an important instructional goal. Let alone, you know what else that is? It's a safety goal. Because if I can teach him or her to get up independently in the morning and get dressed and shower, now I don't have to have a paid staff person with her for the rest of her life. And that increases her safety significantly. A family that I work with, when we talked about this, said, yeah, but he hates loud noises. I said, that's the definition of an alarm clock. And make sure you put it across the room so he has to get up to turn it off. So here's just a list of everything that I do throughout the day. You have your own list. Speed reading, you get this? We actually have like a little chart that we sometimes use to sort of highlight that, like what's important, what's not. I recently reviewed an IEP for an 18-year-old kid, and these were some of the actual goals. When is your birthday? Where do you live? Wiping after a bowel movement, make a meal with a recipe, make a meal with a microwave. So, when is your birthday? Wrong answer. And let alone, it's one of the few things we teach kids that changes every year, right? So after you acquire this, then it's the wrong answer. So forget about that. Where do you live? You don't do it frequently, but it's a safety skill, right? So let me teach you that, but also let me teach you to multiple exemplars. Let me don't teach you where do you live, what's your address, what neighborhood do you live in. Let me give you because that's what people ask. We haven't yet trained the rest of the world to say, John, what's your address? And unless we do that, he's not going to respond. Wiping after bowel movement, you should do it every day. That's really important. Make a meal with a recipe. Well, once a week you can do that. Sort of important. But there's lots of really healthy microwave meals. And if I want him to learn as quickly as possible to do something, maybe I should focus on that. And if not, when we do recipes, we do video recipes. And there are about 9,000 video recipes you can download online. Because a lot of my guys respond to video models better than they do to text models. So let's do that. Gonna skip over that. You got this? Good. Okay, I'll get you. I think the number 7 is we have to accept the fact that life is not perfect. Okay? In a study on people washing their hands after using the bathroom, it's like 5% of women and 10% of men or something didn't wash their hands after using the bathroom. And then this sort of goes up, but then less than 5% of people actually wash their hands well enough to remove bacteria from their hands. So I'm not shaking hands with anybody here today, just so you know. But we will spend months and months and months trying to teach this kid to wash his hands, right? When his teachers don't do it the way they're supposed to. So what we do now is we say, okay, you haven't mastered hand washing, good. Here's a little thing of Purell, you're gonna put it in your pocket, and every time you come out of the bathroom, we're gonna help you, we're gonna prompt to see if you wash your hands, but then you're gonna use Purell just to make sure, and then we're gonna go on. Because I don't have the time to worry about it. In a recent study on casual sex, in spring break, something like 75% of men and women had sex with someone they just met on spring break, or whatever the number is up there. It's a high number. And then by the time they leave college, it's up in the 80s. You know what that means? That by definition, that's appropriate behavior. If the majority of people do something, that's our definition of appropriate behavior. Is that what we want to teach? I don't think so. But if we stick to this appropriate behavior thing, that's what we should be teaching. You know what? Life is really complex. A survey of Americans found that less than 20% of Americans actually balance their checkbook. Yet I go to transition programs all the time, and I see kids working on balancing your checkbook. You know how I balance my checkbook? I go to the Bank of America website, I look at the number, and I say, good, and I write it in my book. That's about it, okay? There is no perfect life, right? Mistakes happen all the time. In ASD and behavior analysis, we often have this criteria of mastery, right? 90% accuracy across 3 consecutive sessions, 5 different teachers, 12 state holidays, 4 vehicles, and a change of clothes. Like, that's always, we do this. 90% accuracy, I'll tell you what, like, if when I die, if they could put I was 90% accurate on my tombstone, that's really a heck of a life. Considering I'm divorced twice, I don't think that's gonna happen. Some closing thoughts. Let me talk about happiness for a little bit. This was a study done by Gloria Saccarelli, Avi Glickman, and myself, where we use this little device, which is it's like a video iPod. It's just an MP4 player watch, but it costs $49 as opposed to $200-something for a video iPod. And we want to teach a 20-year-old adult male with classic autism, low verbal, history of aggression, to independently work out at the gym, but to enjoy working out at the gym. That was the big thing. We wanted to enjoy working out at the gym. So what we did is we took videos of him on the different exercises. We took a lot of videos so we could edit it down into a stream of him doing it correctly. Then, using his actual iPod on shuffle mode, we identified his most preferred songs. If he stayed on a song for any length of time, like it was more preferred than a song, he clicked past. At the time of the study, his favorite song was the 1980 Tony Basil, "Oh, Mickey, you're so fine, you blow my mind." That was his least favorite exercise was the Stairmaster. So on the video on the watch, we paired the Tony Basil song with the Stairmaster video. Now, the other exercises also got good songs and this and that, so the video would be, Nick, go to the treadmill, yada, yada, and then the music would start, the video would start, okay? Now, because we are behavior analysts, we are apparently legally required to initially do a Velcro and laminate picture schedule of him doing this, and that's the first half of this graph. Now, we did it a little too long, should have stopped it probably like after Thanksgiving, but you know, about 60% independence on the steps, but then we turn on the watch and look what happens. He jumps up to complete independence. But you know what? Those aren't the important data. These are. We looked at affect, okay? And when he used the picture schedule, look where his affect was. He was just neutral. He just did it because he was being told to do it. We turned on the watch and look what happened. He started smiling, he started laughing, he started singing along to the music, which in and of itself was another problem, but that's besides the point. He was now exercising and enjoying it. And what I love about this intervention is we didn't do anything that everybody else at the gym wasn't doing. All we did was focus on him and what his preferences were to make this work for him. That's all we did. One of the interesting things is we found that every 6-7 weeks, you know what we have to do? Change the songs. Because just like everybody else, he gets tired of songs. And so we have to keep rotating. Where we have this thing, it's like, oh no, he likes this song. Oh no, he likes this. Like he stopped liking this song about 7 years ago. Now he just tolerates this song barely. Don't dream it, be it. Talks like this, and I hope you found some of what I said interesting, and I hope you had a chance to maybe you laughed at some of the stuff I said, but they're a really ineffective way to change your behavior. You may come to these conferences and you get all energized and you get all interested, and then you go back and you're in the same system you were before. And the contingencies there don't necessarily reinforce change and support change. And parents go back and they go back to the same family where now they have to do the cooking and they have to do this and they have to go to their job and they have to do all this sort of stuff. So what I'm asking you to do today is take one thing you thought was interesting, just one thing, and try it. And do me a favor, let me know what happened. Let me know what happened. And I think if we can start this whole community of people trying this stuff, I think we'll come up with some really good ideas about how to support people to have real lives of competence, dignity, and quality. A failure is not always a mistake. It may simply be the best one can do under the circumstances. The real mistake is to stop trying. I do think one of the differences between me and other professionals is that I'm willing to fail more often. I'm willing to try to teach kids skills that I'm not sure I know how to teach them. I will tell you, I have failed in every attempt to teach adolescents with classic autism not to go with strangers in the community. You know why I failed at every attempt? Because we're really good at compliance training. Because we teach all these kids to be compliant to any adult in their community, and that's a really tough rule to break now. We tried to teach a bunch of nonverbal adults to use their smartphones to take photographs of where they were in the community and send us the photographs so we knew where they were. And we taught them to take photographs, so we taught them to text them to us. What we were never able to teach them to do was take a photograph of anything that was even remotely relevant to where they were in the community. So we got photographs of pigeons, of their shoes, of food. You know, now we're actually trying with panorama view. We're going to try panorama view and do, but also we may not do it because now with GPS function and all this other kind of stuff, maybe we don't even need to do this. I don't know. But you got to have a big vision. You got to believe that people deserve a real life. Because if you don't believe that, you set the bar very low and all kids end up having is a classroom life. So I encourage all of you to think big and save the world with behavior analysis. Thank you all very much for your kind attention.